Hi, welcome back to AWS. Today and very soon we're going to be speaking with the watercolour artist called Jeff Williams. Jeff is a retired professor of architecture and he spent many years throughout his career in America working with a number of firms, very large ones, doing big projects, but also doing smaller work. And as a young architect, he also won a number of, design competitions, which had him travel around Europe and perfect his drawing skills. Jeff's bewitched with the medium of watercolour, and you can see that in today's interview where he gets to tell you all about how he got involved with plein air competitions in the US. He shares some of his work and what happened to actually create those pieces of work and who he really likes to work with and how he likes to work. So I hope you will enjoy this video, and if you do, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. Don't forget the bell notification, that's really important, particularly if you'd like to hear about more of our behind the scenes interviews with artists, both watercolour, oils, sculpture, and a whole bunch of other mediums. We're glad you're here and we hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for making the time to come and catch up and to get the story behind the artist, because as we both know, a lot of artists are no longer with us in history, and we, I don't know about you, but I hanker for those great shows where they suddenly will show, you know, the history and what happened to Van Gogh and where he lived. So I thought, why not do it with a living artist? Try and get some of that backstory. Try and get some of that behind the scenes stuff you don't get, you know. So welcome, Jeff, to AWS, and tell me what have you been up to in your studio, which I think we're in now, are we?
We are. Thank you, first off, very much for having me. I appreciate this, and I really encourage you to, in your efforts as you're doing this. I think it's a wonderful thing you're doing. So I appreciate being included. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some information to your viewers that'll be helpful to them as well. You know, we've been sheltered in place for a good while, and you know, lots of projects going on around the house just to stay busy. And so I have some things in progress I could share with you, and also a few things that I've done.
So you've actually been highlighting a lot of other artists. You've been bringing that attention to people who you admire and you know, very, very talented artists in watercolour. Tell us a bit about you.
I am a watercolor painter, and fairly recent one, just within the last few years, honestly. My background is as an architect, and so I've drawn for a very long time, but I had never painted. I admired watercolor, came to watercolor through architecture because it was a traditional representation medium. And so I saw these beautiful old Beaux-Arts renderings, and my grandfather was an architect, and so I saw watercolor renderings that he'd done, and I just always have had an appreciation for that and thought at some point I'd like to do that. But I was raising a family, I was running a practice, and I was teaching full time, and so I did that and had no time during the day. Sometimes during the lunch I would be able to, when the internet came along, I started getting online and searching for images and watercolor painters just to build a visual vocabulary. I collected lots of books, which you can see some of behind me, and I had several offices full of books. So I built up a visual vocabulary with that, and I used to teach students to draw and take them overseas, and we'd travel in Europe and sketch and draw, mostly in pencil, sometimes in ink. But watercolor really wasn't part of that. And at some point, I thought, well, I'll force myself to paint. I'll do that if I invest in a workshop or two, and you know, maybe that'll get me going more. And so I took 2 or 3 workshops. First one was with Tony Van Hasselt, may not be a painter that you know, but a very good watercolor painter and workshop instructor from the 60s and 70s even. He was trained by or educated by Edgar Whitney, as well as he orchestrated travel workshops for other artists at the time. So people like Robert E. Wood or Milford Zorn, or you know, other noted watercolor artists from the 60s and 70s. And as a process of doing that, he also learned from them. And I found him a very good instructor, particularly for someone beginning. And he's late 80s now, but he's still leading workshops to Europe and to Mexico, and he lives up in Maine. His health's very good, and he's a delightful guy. So we became great friends. I then took a workshop from Tom Schaller, who had an architecture background, and I was able to bring him into the university where I was teaching to do a demo and a lecture, and got to know him, and then went to do a workshop with him. And in the process, one of the artists that I'd always admired through books and internet work was Joseph Bewitched, like many other watercolor artists throughout the world. And Tom really sung Joseph's praises and talked about the fact that Joseph really was the one that kicked him off into the fine art world. And he just, as we spent time together during the week, he really raved about Joseph. And at the end of the week, the workshop program I was at announced the programs for the coming year. And Joseph was going to be at this place the next year. And I immediately turned to my wife and I said, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. I don't know how I'm going to get the time because it's during class time, during the university class schedule, but I'm coming. So I signed up with Joseph and we became good friends. And I've done a couple workshops with him as well. But I still found during that time, I was working so much that when I came back to real life, it was hard to make the time. And through a circumstance of life, family, health, different things, I concluded I needed to make a change at that time in my life. And so I retired a little bit early. And the reason I wanted to do it, I love the way that color disperses in water. It's mesmerizing, brought new life to the types of drawings that I used to do. And frankly, because of some of my health issues, I can't do those drawings in the same way anymore. And I found with the watercolor brush, I could hold it very loosely and start to do that. So I thought, well, this is very encouraging. I can continue to do something. And honestly, to me, one of the most special things about painting was the opportunity to learn something new. And I wanted in retirement to be able to keep learning till the day I die and keep developing in some positive way. And so painting was going to be that for me. A couple things I did once I was learning were, I don't know if you've heard of the Strata Easel Challenge, but they have a 30-day challenge, a 31-day challenge. It's an easel that's produced in the United States. I had made some friends at some of these workshops that were professional painters that were very encouraging and encouraged me to consider the plein air circuit. Well, of course, plein air painting is painting from life, painting outside. The plein air circuit is a professional painting circuit in the United States. Many of them are open events that anyone can sign up and paint in for the recreation of doing it, for the fellowship with other painters or learning. But there are professional painting events that are juried programs that you submit a few painting images. They hire a big name painter to evaluate all the submissions and select usually about 20 to 30 painters to come to a location. They get housed for a week and fed a little bit. The artists check in and have their paper stamped so that you can prove that you did the painting that week. And then you paint furiously for a week as much as you can. At the end of the week, the paintings go up in a gallery show. Paintings are for sale to the public. And then there are awards given for the best paintings that week. So it's a competition. I'd done so much competition in architecture as I went through my professional career that I really wasn't interested in competitions. And so when my friends were telling me about this, I said, I don't think that's for me. But they encouraged me to come down to an event. We went down there for the week, and my wife and I, and just hung out with these painters. And I painted a little bit, and I mainly tried to move around in all the different event activities and see what this was like. Not expecting to like it, to be honest. But what I found was that collegiality between the artists was just absolutely amazing. They were there to support each other, to challenge each other, to push each other, to do the very best work that they could. And at the end, when the awards are given, that really wasn't the motivator for them. It wasn't, that people were getting jealous or upset over one person or another getting awards. And because the awards are determined by a particular judge, usually an individual that's brought in to do that, it's only the opinion of that one person. So as you go from event to event, different people are selected usually as the winners of these events. And so the competition was more within yourself to do your very best work. And it was such a different environment than I expected. The events are typically fundraising events for some nonprofit organization or another that's organizing it. So I feel good about trying to help support an arts program or some other type of nonprofit that is needy in some way. The work that goes on sale is like a gallery where the artist gets a percentage of the proceeds and the sponsoring organization gets a percentage to support themselves. I decided, well, I'll try this. And I really didn't expect my work to hold up. Most of these painters are frankly oil painters, and you have to come prepared with all your frames and your mats, and have planned all of that out ahead of time. It turns out it's a very interesting thing to me, and I love the challenge. And so I sent out 14 applications last year to different groups, hoping I would get in one or two. And I was shocked to get in 12 of 14. I put over 25,000 miles on my car last year traveling. I was on the road probably 75% of the year, and having a ball. And I really wasn't prepared for what happened, but we kind of worked our way through it, and it was very exciting to have something like that in my life again. I felt like I was 21, not knowing what the future was going to be, starting this new career and nervous about it. I went to the first event, and it was like a trial by fire, probably is the way to say it. But I was very nervous. I wanted to prove I belonged there. I had absolutely no expectation of winning anything. Thought if I'm really lucky, I might sell a painting or two at the end of the week. But it was a fascinating experience for me. I got down there a couple days early to scout everything out and be really well prepared. I found beautiful sites, things to paint. It was down in the Louisiana coastal area, which is down near the Gulf of Mexico. Bayous, swamps, coastal areas, shrimp boats. And I found these beautiful sunset locations and got all these ideas in my head about what I could do all week. The first day of the event, the sun went away and the clouds were out all day. So I immediately had to start doing things differently, and it was very humid, so I couldn't get anything to dry. I started 4 paintings that day. I'd start one, and then I'd run to another location, try to let that dry. I'd start another one, and so I got 4 started. I didn't finish any that day. In fact, it took me all week to finish some of those, but the conditions kept changing. So we had the humidity and the grayness the first day. The second day, rains came. So I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I position myself to do some of these paintings? I had to be prepared to not let my paper get hit by raindrops. Then the next day, the fog came, and we were fogged in for most of the day. So then the day after that, the winds came, blew my easel over twice. It just, blew crazy all day. So I was learning to shield myself from that. The day after that, because of all those winds, the pollen on the trees got blown all over. So there were these yellow clouds and haze all over the skies, and people's allergies were going crazy. My back went out then, and so I was laying on ice on the bed during the day thinking, I need to be out painting. How do I do this? And I finally figured out that I could get in my car and run the heater in my car seat and keep my back flexible enough, and I could paint on the steering wheel of the car for a while. And I did that for a couple of days, and then I got food poisoning, and it just kept going on like this the whole time. And I still produced 9 or 10 paintings, and it turns out I won the Nocturne Award that day, which was interesting because I didn't paint a nocturne. I didn't think I painted a nocturne, but the last painting I did, which was actually this one right here, this was a painting of a bridge down near the coast that was done on the last day. And I went down there. It was actually a very gray day. And I got the painting all laid out. I talked to the park ranger as he'd keep coming back and chat with me. And the guys would come in from fishing and be waving from the water. And I'm doing my layout drawings and thinking about the painting. And I thought, I am so tired of painting gray stuff. I'm going to just paint the view as I remembered it from the week before. Now, I was out there on site. I'm looking at that view. I'm using that to help me see light and to construct the drawing of the painting. Color palette, the effects in the sky, the effects of the lighting were what I remembered from the week earlier when I saw that sunset time frame. And I was shocked when it won a Nocturne Award because I hadn't marked it as a Nocturne. I didn't think I'd done a Nocturne, and I wasn't even paying attention when they said they were going to announce the Nocturne Award because I hadn't done one. But they considered it one and gave it the award. So I was absolutely thrilled and embarrassed, honestly. I didn't know what to say to the artists that had been spending all night out there trying to do these nocturne paintings in the dark. I felt bad for them, but it was an amazing experience. And my other events that I've done, I've been up in the mountains and up on the coast and up near the Canadian border and back in the woods and out on Cape Ann in the areas where Homer and Sargent and Wyeth and others painted. These things have just taken me to places I never would have gone. But then everything has been canceled because of the COVID crisis or rescheduled, so I haven't sold a painting all year. I've been hibernating at home and doing other things and trying to paint here. I've done a few commission type things, but I'm really missing getting out there and having that energy and that activity.
And I can see that this has given you a new lease on life in terms of what you do. As an architect, and having a busy practice and a family and managing all of that, what do you think is the key difference between that kind of busyness and this kind of busyness for you?
My architectural practice was small. I would say it's modest. At one point, I was in a very large firm up in Minnesota, and I worked on projects for the Mayo Clinic and major projects throughout the United States, and traveled and was solely focused on practice. But once I started teaching full time, that demanded so much of my time that and the university I teach at is a smaller town, so there are fewer opportunities to practice than there would be in a larger urban area. But I was able to be, because my income was coming primarily from teaching, I was able to be a lot more selective in the types of projects that I took on. And I sometimes did consulting for other firms on larger projects. But I found I really loved interacting with the students, and that was something that took a lot of my time. We didn't have summer classes very much, but that was the time I was taking students overseas. And so you're kind of on 24/7 with them when you're traveling like that.
And I can only imagine what that'd be like, teaching plus the family and trying to fit in the painting. When you learnt and you talked about Joseph, and you can't talk about watercolor without Joseph's names popping up. And he's obviously very, very good at capturing real life. So what's the one key thing you learned from Joseph, do you think, that stayed with you the most?
I was so impressed with him. He's an exceptionally nice person. And he was very gracious. He made it very comfortable to be around him. He's demanding. He expects a lot out of himself, and he wants others to perform well too. He wants to be able to help others do that. For me, it was like watching magic happen. It's just amazing to see him apply the paint, and in such a judicious way. I read his book, but his watercolor clock was a big thing that he developed in trying to communicate moisture levels to people. And when I first read it, I thought, is this a gimmick? Is this something the editor kind of made him come up with something like this to to sell books, or does he really believe this? And I was naive. I was new. I was trying to learn this. And when we had the workshop, I was amazed that it was the key to his ability to do all these techniques. He draws exceptionally well. So there's a very intuitive construction to his paintings and composition to the paintings, but he knows exactly what's going to happen with that paint almost all the time. And he's so adept at manipulating the moisture levels in the paint and the reactions that are going to happen. If something does happen unexpectedly, he doesn't look at it as a problem. He sees it as an opportunity. And he always would say, well, that's what the watercolor wanted to do, or that's what the watercolor gods said should happen. And he takes it to advantage for him. And I was just mesmerized watching him put paint down, because, I might work over a wash area to try and get the gradation the way I want, or a color mixture the way I want, or, an effect like that. And I spend way too much time doing it, and it's so hard to get it to work correctly. And he would do it so effortlessly, and he could load his brush in a way and hold the brush at just the right angle, and he'd do it in the sweep of one motion. And it was just mesmerizing. I could watch him paint for hours and hours every day, probably. But, I look at what I do, and there are things that, I've had success with, or I think of as having accomplished something. I'm satisfied with the painting in one way or another, or even, maybe it's won awards. But when I step back and look at it, I think the work that I've done thus far is really a result of having learned composition and understanding of value and drawing skills and perspective, and, all of those other things that are part of putting a painting together. And when I'm honest about the watercolor side of it, I've got so much to learn. I recognize that there's a huge gap there. And I took a couple workshops with Joseph, so we got to know each other pretty well. And we actually wound up on his last trip to the States last year, I guess it was, in May. He'd come over because he was recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Plein Air Convention. We painted up in the mountains for several days in some of the mountain towns, and I felt like I painted horribly. I was so disappointed. I wanted to put on a show for Joseph that made him feel really good and see how far I'd come. And, I'd had some successes, and I just felt, so inadequate because he was so good. But I just had to finally say, I'm really frustrated, but I'm comparing myself to the best guy in the world, maybe. So, maybe I need to give myself a break.
Correct. I'm glad you did give yourself a break.
I know.
What can you show us, Jeff, while we're there? Let's have a look at some of the work that you've done.
This is one from the Two Rivers plein air competition. Every painting when you're outside like this winds up having a story. I found this abandoned rail car sitting off on the side yard of a rail area in this town that we were painting in for the event. I thought I was out of the way. It turned out this was an extremely busy little rail yard, and it was the area that they orchestrated all their service from. So they came over and wanted me to move, and so I wound up huddled up next to a trash dumpster and parked my car near me to protect myself. Railroad cars were driving by, or trains were going by, and so it looks like a very serene, historic painting, and that's what I saw it as and thought of it in my head, but it was anything but around me as I was doing the painting. Here's another painting from a trip that I took down to Texas. I live in Oklahoma, which is north of Texas. Texas is one of the largest states in our country. And down at the Texas border, there is a very large national park called Big Bend National Park. Not visited by very many people, dramatic landscapes, but it's just so distant to get to that not too many people go there. And it's extremely hot during most of the year, so we won't go down in February. There's a group of us that go down there. This group of ours, somehow we became known as the Rattlesnake Gang. I don't know how that came up, but we make a trip down there to Big Bend each year and paint this, what is a dramatic landscape area. And on the way, I have a friend that has a very large ranch down in Texas, and this painting was done on that ranch on the way home. This was one that I did down there this year. We're expecting to have a show in a gallery in San Antonio next March, work from these various trips that the 7 of us have produced. But
whereabouts are you born and bred?
I was actually born and raised for the most part in New Jersey, which is on the east coast of the United States, up near New York City in New York State.
Yeah.
And as I said, my grandfather was an architect up there. And so when I express any interest in drawing as a kid, naturally my family would say, well, he's going to be an architect. And, I really never had any art background because of that. Things got channeled in that direction and I didn't question it. And honestly, I enjoyed a whole lot about what I did as an architect. We moved to Oklahoma when I was 16 or so. And as a result, I went to college at Oklahoma State University. While I was there, I got a wonderful design education there. There were a unique group of people there at the time. I had great mentorship, and I was very fortunate to win a national design competition. It was the top competition in the country, and so the prize was to win funds to travel overseas for a year. So I traveled in Europe. My wife and I quit our jobs. We sold our cars, we sold our house, all our furniture, and bought a little caravan and traveled around Europe in the caravan. And then during that time, I decided I needed to keep a journal. And so I decided I wanted to focus on sketching, drawing. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ted Kotsky, but I fell in love with Ted Kotsky's Pencil Broadsides book. It's an exceptional book. This was a copy of my grandfather's that I found and fell in love with the way that Kotsky drew in pencil.
Yes.
And just fabulous, drawings that felt very much like watercolor actually to me.
Pencil Broadsides by Theodore Kotsky. Wonderful. So tell me about this book.
I used it to learn to draw myself. So I went around and tried to sketch the architecture that I was studying as I would travel in Europe. And through the process, taught myself to draw with pencil. We didn't have art classes in architecture per se. We were expected to draw our projects, and in the studio, we learned to do that over time. I really never had any art training. So I learned to draw with pencil and ink and Prismacolor pencils, and we did things with pastel and acrylic paint and acrylic paint with airbrush and things. But I never did watercolor for some reason.
What else was it? What's he going to show me?
This is a barn near in Oklahoma there's a lot of barns like this around, and I had seen this a couple of years ago. And I just started this particular painting. I was just exploring some new colors that someone had suggested. But as I was painting the barn, I thought, well, I've always wanted to paint that barn plein air. And I decided I could drive up there. I drove an hour and a half to the location, and it had blown down. It was already completely gone. So I'm going to paint it some more, but I'll have to do that for photographs. Oklahoma is a fascinating but subtle landscape, and can be wide open plains. It can be hills and valleys. That barn is up in northeastern Oklahoma, up near an area that's called the Tall Grass Prairies. And there can be grasses as tall as I am. I'm 6'7" tall.
Tell me, I'd be looking for rattlesnakes in that grass.
But when I walked through that grass and seen it at my eye levels, I wonder what's at my feet a lot. Yes. But,
I'd be keeping one eye down, one eye on the painting, one eye down on the grass. Tell me something, Jeff. What's coming up that you are looking forward to?
That's a good question. I look forward to the opportunity to get back out and find these challenges through the plein air events, but I'm going to need to find challenges around here for a while we're continuing to be needing to stay put.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for being on AWS. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Really like this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and get a notification if you want to find out more about great artists or such as Jeff Williams. Thanks so much, Jeff, for having us today into your studio.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.